Today we're diving deep into one of the most exhaustive investigations in modern British history. It's called Operation Paget. This was the massive police inquiry set up to sift through all the conspiracy allegations that exploded after the tragic death of Diana, Princess of Wales. So we're going to peel back the layers on exactly what they looked at and, more importantly, what they actually found.
You know, that crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris, it sent shockwaves around the entire planet. But in that silence, as everyone was trying to process the grief, this whole other narrative started bubbling up. A story of suspicion, of secrets, of conspiracy that would dominate the conversation for years to come.
And so, Operation Paget was born. Now, you've got to understand, its job wasn't to reinvestigate the crash itself. The French authorities had already done that. No, Paget's team had one very specific mission: to take every single conspiracy claim seriously and see if there was any credible evidence to back them up, all for the official coroner's inquest.
All right, let's kick things off with the big one, the allegation that really fueled everything, the idea that there was a powerful motive for murder, one that was tangled up in Diana's personal life and her new romance with Dodi Al Fayed.
And this question, this is the absolute heart of the whole conspiracy theory. The claim was that Diana was pregnant with Dodi's child, that they were about to announce their engagement, and that this was a reality the so-called establishment would do anything to prevent.
So you had Mohamed Al Fayed, Dodi's father, and he was completely convinced, stating that Diana herself had told him they were getting engaged and that she was pregnant. For the investigators, this was huge. It gave them a clear, alleged motive they had to chase down and test against the facts.
But to really get a grip on this, you have to look at the timeline. And honestly, it's pretty revealing. Operation Paget confirmed that Diana's serious 2-year relationship with surgeon Hasnat Khan had literally just ended. At the same time, Dodi Al Fayed had been engaged to someone else, a model named Kelly Fisher, right up until early August. His relationship with Diana was incredibly new. We're talking weeks, not months.
And then there was this whole drama around the so-called engagement ring. The jeweler, a man named Alberto Rapazzi, gave investigators multiple, totally conflicting stories. First, he said Diana and Dodi picked it out together. Then he changed his story and said Dodi just saw it in the window by himself. The details kept shifting. For investigators, it was a mess, making it impossible to pin down what really happened with that ring.
Okay, let's shift gears and look at the crash itself. We're going to focus on two key pieces of the conspiracy puzzle: the driver, Henri Paul, and the car he was driving, the Mercedes S280. So who was Henri Paul, the man behind the wheel? The official French investigation concluded he was the main reason for the crash, but the conspiracy theories painted a very different picture: that he was a highly skilled, totally sober driver whose reputation was destroyed after his death to cover up a murder plot.
But the French toxicology reports, well, they came back with a number that was just impossible to ignore. A blood alcohol level of 1.74 grams per liter. Let's put that in perspective. That is more than 3 times the legal limit in France. This one fact became a cornerstone of the official conclusion. This was a terrible accident caused by a driver who was seriously impaired.
But things got a little complicated when it came to the carbon monoxide levels in his blood. The first sample they tested showed a really high level, over 20%, which seems suspicious. But a second sample, taken from a more reliable location, was much lower, around 12.8%. The Paget report basically said, look, that first sample got contaminated from fluids in the chest cavity after he died. The second one is the one you can trust.
So, what about the car? Was it tampered with? Was it sabotaged? Investigators from both France and Britain went over that Mercedes with a fine-tooth comb, and their conclusion was unanimous: no pre-existing mechanical problems, absolutely no evidence of tampering with the brakes or steering, and that story about the speedometer being stuck at a high speed? Nope, it was at 0.
Okay, so what happened right after the crash? Because the moments immediately following the collision became another huge focal point for the conspiracy theories. Let's look at the claims about the medical response and what happened to Diana's body.
You've got 2 major claims here. 1, the ambulance took way too long on purpose to get to the hospital. And 2, Diana's body was illegally embalmed specifically to hide evidence that she was pregnant. So, investigators pieced together the timeline minute by minute. What they found was that in the French medical system, the philosophy is to treat, then transport. They bring the emergency room to the patient. So doctors were on the scene, giving Diana intensive care right there in the tunnel. The slow drive to the hospital was a deliberate medical decision by the senior doctor on site because her blood pressure was dangerously unstable. It wasn't a plot, it was the doctor desperately trying to keep her alive.
So about that second claim, the embalming, what even is it? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's a procedure that uses chemicals to preserve a body, mostly to slow down decomposition so that family and friends can have a viewing.
And in France, there are very specific rules about this. You can't just do it. It requires a request from the family, and this is crucial, a doctor has to sign off on a certificate saying there are no legal reasons, like a forensic investigation, to stop it.
And this right here is the key. The French prosecutor initially ruled this was a road traffic accident. That meant, legally, the only person who needed an autopsy was the driver, Henri Paul. Since no autopsy was ordered for Diana, there was no legal obstacle to the embalming. It was done by the book, according to French law, and in line with the family's wishes. And that brings us to the really wild stuff. The spies, the secrecy, the idea that this wasn't an accident at all, but a sophisticated assassination carried out by intelligence agencies, followed by a massive cover-up.
A star witness for this theory was a former MI6 officer, Richard Tomlinson. But here's the thing, his story changed. In a manuscript he wrote before Diana's death, he described a plot to kill Slobodan Milosevic with a drive-by shooting. But after the crash, his testimony suddenly included a new, very convenient detail, a plan to stage a car crash in a tunnel using a strobe light. The fact this memory only popped up after the event raised huge red flags about his credibility. And then there was the mystery of the white Fiat Uno some witnesses saw in the tunnel. Suspicion fell on a photographer named James Anderson, who owned one, but the Paget report confirmed his alibi was solid. He was at his home hundreds of miles away. And while forensic tests on his car couldn't definitively rule it in or out, the French police were ultimately satisfied he was not involved.
But what about the Americans? Were they listening in? Well, the U.S. National Security Agency, the NSA, gave a very, very clear answer to Operation Paget. Their director of policy said, and I'm quoting directly, "I can categorically confirm that NSA did not target Princess Diana nor collect any of her communications." In other words, yes, her name was in their files, but no, they weren't spying on her, and nothing they had was relevant to the crash. So, in the end, what was the point of this massive 832-page report? Well, its purpose wasn't to deliver a final verdict. Its job was to take every single allegation, every theory, and test it against the cold, hard evidence, so that the official inquest could make its decision based on a foundation of fact.
And that really leaves all of us with a tough question to think about. When a tragedy is this big, this public, and this painful, where does our responsibility to the evidence stop and the sheer power of what we want to believe take over?